Welcome to Dollar Gujarati, a show about successful Gujarati entrepreneurs and professionals in America. We talk with them about their ideas and struggles on the road to success in this land of opportunity. As immigrants ourselves, we want to understand the different paths that successful immigrant Gujaratis have taken to establish themselves. This will also help us to navigate our journey in America. Hi everyone. Today we have on our show Keval Desai. Keval Desai, like many of us, came to the United States for a master's in electrical engineering. He did his master's, worked as an engineer, and then also did his MBA from the University of California at Berkeley. After his MBA, he co-founded a startup called HX, which was successfully acquired, and then worked with Google as a product manager for many years. Today, he is a venture capitalist with InterWest Partners in Silicon Valley. A venture capitalist is a very different kind of business from most of what our Gujaratis are used to. So I think we can learn a lot from this conversation with Keval. Keval manages a fund of more than $100 million at InterWest Partners and invests in successful companies such as Canva, which is now valued at $6 billion. We're glad to have you on our show, Keval.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on this podcast. It's a great honor and pleasure to speak with you and your audience. અને આપણે શરૂઆતમાં બધાને હું નમસ્તે કહું છું અને મારા તરફથી મારા ફેમિલી તરફથી તમને અને તમારા ઓડિયન્સને હાર્દિક શુભેચ્છાઓ મોકલાવું છું અને આ સમય આપણે હમણાં જે આખી દુનિયામાં કોવિડની વાયરસમાં આપણે જે સંઘર્ષ કરી રહ્યા છે એ સંઘર્ષમાં આપણે બધા જ સક્સેસફુલ થઈએ એવી પ્રાર્થના અને શુભકામનાઓ પાઠવું છું. Thanks for having me on your call.
First, what does a venture capitalist firm actually do?
Great question. Yeah, venture capital firms, first of all, there are all kinds of venture capital firms. Some very small ones, some very large ones, and then everything in between. There are individuals who act as venture capitalists, and then there are partnerships, a group of people who come together to perform a venture capital service. And the primary function of venture capitalists is to be a conduit between capital that is looking for attractive returns and entrepreneurs who are looking for that capital to build their startups. So venture capitalist, in essence, is a service provider to two customers. The entrepreneur, on the one hand, who is looking to start a company and needs the early capital to get going, and the investors, or as they're called, limited partners, who are looking to invest capital in what are traditionally private markets, where you can potentially have very high returns above the returns that a public market investment might get you, but that carry a significant risk because you're investing in early stage private companies. So a VC or venture capitalist, in essence, is a catalyst for the startup ecosystem that we have all come to know and mostly love.
Okay, so is it safe to say that a VC firm does not invest their own money? There are two types of partners, is what I understand, general partners and limited partners. So how do you distinguish between somebody who is running the VC firm and a person who is invested in the VC firm?
Yeah, so there are all kinds of venture firms, but let's take a traditional venture capital firm such as our firm. In our firm, when you, InterWest Partners, for example, as a firm has been around for 40 years, we have raised 10 funds over those 40 years, and we're currently investing from our 10th fund, which is where I'm a partner at. And so in a firm like ours, when you raise a fund, there are two types of people who invest in that fund, as you said, the limited partners, the institutions who are looking to invest in the venture ecosystem, and the general partner, the people who are running the firm and investing the capital and are responsible for returning it back to the limited partners. In a fund like that, both the LPs and the GPs are investors. The LPs typically put most of the capital. So it could be anywhere from 90 to 95 to 99% of the capital of the fund comes from limited partners. The general partner also invests their own capital. That's usually anywhere from 1% to 5%, sometimes up to 10%, depending on the firm. So both these entities are investors. So I have my personal capital in the InterWest fund that I'm a general partner in.
How do you go about fundraising from these private investors? Do you knock on their door and say, hey, we're starting a new fund. I've put in $1 million of my money, and would you put in 20 million of yours?
Yeah,
How
I think
does that work?
yeah. Typically, when you're starting something, you go to people who typically already know you, and so you go to friends and families, or you go to people that they know, or you probably go to companies that you worked at before, or sometimes you go to these large financial institutions, pension funds, endowments, college endowments, who have as part of their portfolio diversification strategy a desire to invest in the private equity asset class, of which venture capital is a smaller subset.
So, how does a VC firm make money?
The people who give us money, the investors, our LPs who give us money, if they give us $1, they expect $3 back, at least. Hopefully more, but at least. Now, for us to give them $3 back, we actually have to produce $4, because we also have to pay ourselves and our team and our infrastructure. And so there's this thing called the venture capital management fee and the carry, which is the interest, the carried interest, the profits that hopefully we all will have and will share in them. And the typical venture capital model is, it's called 2 and 20, where if you raise a fund, you get 2% of the fund's asset value as your management fee every year. So let's say we raise a $100 million fund, and the fund typically is a 10-year life. Then, and let's say the four of us are partners, then every year we get $2 million in fees for 10 years on average, because it's 2% of the asset value, right? And then if we make money in the fund, we invest $100 million, and hopefully, we start returning capital. The first $100 million goes back to our limited partners, all of it. We as general partners don't see anything. But then after the first $100 million has been returned, every single dollar that we produce in profit after that, we split it 80-20. 80 cents on the dollar goes to the limited partners, and 20 cents goes to the general partners. So that's where the 2 and 20 phrase comes from. 2% of the fees, 2% of the fund as fees every year for 10 years. So that's really 20%, right? To add up 10 years. So that's $20 million for a $100 million fund. And then 20% of the carry in every dollar of profit. And the profit only starts after you return the original capital.
Awesome. So, how do you select which company to invest in? What are the things that you look for?
What do we look for? We look for big market, an amazing CEO, and then a reasonable thesis for why now. Why should this company succeed? For me, I boil it down to some very simple things. I sort of say, if you and I were talking about your company, first thing I would think about is, can I see this company's product and its service? Can I see it being used by 1 billion people someday? There are 7 billion people in the world, right? So 7 billion of us, and the world is growing, maybe 5-10% annually in terms of headcount, if you will. So 7 billion people, right? Maybe the 1.5 billion or 2 billion of those are kids, but so 5 billion adults. But we can sort of start thinking about, is this a product or a use case that can be used by 1 billion people someday? So what are some of those things? Those things typically come down to daily habits, right? Shopping, groceries, for example. Buying, office supplies, learning, education, watching video, right? Communication, productivity, using tools and services that make us more productive, whether at home or at work. Healthcare and well-being, staying healthy and staying fit. So you think about the kind of things that people in the world are doing at a very large scale, right? So that's the first question. Can I see this product or service being used by 1 billion people someday? Not now, but someday if things work out. And then the second question after that is, okay, if I can see 1 billion people using it, can I eventually see them paying something for it? You know, will 10% of those billion people, 100 million of those people, will they pay something for it? And how much will they pay? Will they pay $1 a month, $1 a year, $1 a day? Maybe will they pay $10 a day? Who knows? And so you start making some assumptions and start thinking along those lines. And I think it very quickly allows you to get, or at least allows me to come to a sense of whether this is a big market or not. Okay, so that's how I think about it. I think about it sort of bottoms up, not trying to think top down. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing is, who is the founder? Who is the CEO of this company? Who is the person who's in charge of bringing this vision to fruition? And so in some ways, we're the backseat passengers of a car whose driver is the founder. And so where the car goes is entirely up to the driver. And we have to have confidence and optimism that this driver, this founder, the CEO is going to do all the right things and deal with all of the challenges that come along the way as we go on this journey, which, by the way, can be 6, 8, 10 years in many cases. So the first thing is the market. The second thing is the CEO. One could ask, well, why that order? Why market then CEO? Why not the other way? Why not the CEO first and market second? Like what if you met a Steve Jobs and they were selling lemonade? Would you invest in that kind of a founder? And the answer for me is no. And there are many examples of that. We can talk about a couple. But there is Warren Buffett has this saying that I love, and I'll paraphrase it because you can look it up on the web. He basically says something along the lines of, when great teams collide with lousy markets, it's a reputation of the market that survives. So anyway, market first, CEO second, team second. And then the third thing for me is, why now? I like to ask this question, why now? If you have a big market, typically a big market by definition has a lot of incumbents, right? Yeah. There are other companies who are providing a product or service in that market. That's why the market is big. Well, so then why should a startup exist and have a chance at succeeding in this big market when you have all these large incumbents? So the question of why now is a very important one. I'll give you an example, maybe two examples. I was lucky to invest in a company called Canva, Canva. It's a company that develops software for designing. So you can design anything with Canva. You can design your business card, you can design your website, you can design your Facebook social media profile, your TikTok profile, whatever you want to design. You can design your blog, even t-shirts, coffee mugs, whatever you want. And we were lucky to invest in the company in 2012. The company's founder is Melanie Perkins, who started the company fresh out of college. And now it's a company that's still a private company, but it's I think it's pretty well known now. But it's worth at $6 billion right now based on their last round of financing.
Oh, wow. I didn't know what it was valued at, but I mean, I think a lot of people that I know what Canva is. It's made life far more simpler for us. Photoshop was just crazy tough, and Canva made that like really simple.
There you go. So you just said it. So that's the why now. So we can go through the same analysis that we just went through, which is, how big is the market for design software? Well, can I see 1 billion people using it someday? Yeah, actually you could, right? I mean, think about who needs to design something. Well, everybody. A college student, somebody who's working out of their home office, somebody who's working in a corporate environment, somebody who's opening a restaurant for their menu. Anybody's a designer. Everybody's a designer, right? So you could see it's a big market easily. And then you say, well, okay, but who's the CEO? Wow, we have this amazing entrepreneur who first-time CEO, but had done a little startup of her own before when she was in college, producing calendars and using design software, and more importantly was an instructor for Photoshop in her college. She was a teaching assistant for Photoshop in her college, and had understood firsthand the pain point of using a product like Photoshop, which you alluded to, and had internalized that pain point and had this vision to completely change the user experience for design and essentially democratize design and liberate it so that anybody can have it without even having to have access to something like Photoshop. And then you sort of say, okay, so it's an amazing founder, we want to back her. And then the third question is, why now? Like, why should a company like Canva in 2012 have a chance to compete against Adobe, which is this massive, giant, successful company that's run very well? Why should Canva have any chance of succeeding against these giant incumbents? Why not? And the answer is actually quite obvious and simple, right? Which is that Photoshop was designed for the PC era. It was designed for an era where people had keyboards and mice and sit in front of a computer and you design things, bulky software. And well, you guys, your generation, everybody, whether we are baby boomers or Gen X or Gen Y or Gen Z, everybody today now uses smartphones and mobile devices and these touch-based interfaces, right? We have tablets and smartphones, and a lot of people don't even have a mouse or haven't seen a mouse before, or if they've seen it, it's a different mouse than what we typically think of. So in a world where most people are going to use information and do design through touch-based mobile shop is frankly irrelevant. And Canva has a fantastic answer to the why now question. And then you can see obviously the journey that I've had over the last 8 years, and it's been an amazing journey. Another example I can give you, we have a company called The Real Real, which is an e-commerce marketplace where you can go and buy authenticated luxury products, which we invested in 2013, and it went public last year. And the founder and CEO is Julie Wainwright. And so same thing. You say, well, how big is the market? Well, luxury is $100 billion a year. It's a big market. A lot of these products have been sitting in people's homes and offices for decades, and they're not being used. And the consumer mindset now is to say, look, I want to save the planet. I want to do something good for the environment. I don't want to create waste. So why can't I just put this back in circulation and people who want it can use it now? So this idea of using re-commerce and recirculation to create a sustainable planet, do good for the environment, while also enjoy these luxury products. So big market. And then who's the CEO? Amazing CEO, who's been the CEO of a few companies before, had this fantastic vision. She herself is a luxury fan and has a deep passion for the environment and sustainability. And so you have this amazing leader. And then the why now is, why should this company exist now? Well, think about how consumers and the younger generation, your generation, is changing the conversation in the world. Why the buyers, the consumers are saying, I want to shop responsibly. I don't want to keep buying things that are going to be thrown into the garbage and eventually end up in a landfill that are just going to be bad for the planet. And so this idea of, a sustainable planet, living responsibility has totally changed the way consumers buy today. And that's a value statement that consumers are making all over the world. And so the why now for this company was just changing the consumer habits. People have started buying responsibly. And I think that's not going to go back.
Okay. Let's talk about how you became a VC. When you were growing up as a student in VJTI, or even when you were a software engineer in Silicon Valley, did you want to be a VC in Silicon Valley? Did you even know what that was? Like when you're having dosa at Madras Cafe in Matunga.
Those were good dosas, by the way. They were, no, I had no idea. And for me, and I think for a lot of people I know who are in the venture business, it's an accidental vocation. I ended up here accidentally. So short answer is no. I had no idea back then that I would be a VC or wanted to be a VC. But I did have an idea and a very, very, and I think that's how I ended up in Silicon Valley. But I did have a big passion for understanding how things get started. So as you know, I was an engineer, but studied as an engineer and worked most of my career as an engineering profession. and I think engineers like to know how things work, right? I mean, you want to know, like, how does this thing really work? And so when I look at companies, and I looked at, when I remember distinctly, in my undergrad in electrical engineering, when you're putting together a circuit and you have all these tiny components, and you look at the name of the company on the components, like, Intel or Xilinx or Motorola, and we're like, well, who are these companies? Like, who makes these things? And there's no internet back then, so you sort of look at, you go to the library at the British Council in Bombay, or you go to the VJTI library, you sort of try to look up these people, and you sort of read about the transistor, and then you sort of think about the Fairchild and semiconductors and all these companies, and you sort of get into Silicon Valley because there's that road leads you into that kind of a discovery. And you say, well, who are these companies and who are these people and how did they start? Like, okay, like some of these companies like Motorola, they're 100 years old, but how did they start on day one? So I've always been curious about how things start. And in that context, it's not surprising to me at all that I ended up in Silicon Valley, because this is where things start, at least in the technology frame of mind, right? And so, yeah, I always wanted to be part of Silicon Valley. And so, well, how? And so I wanted to go to grad school to do computer science and all that. I mean, the usual path, as you said. A lot of us came here to pursue higher education, and then you sort of lucked into Silicon Valley for me. But so I always wanted to learn how things start. And then as part of that, I got more and more into the startup ecosystem. And then you realize, okay, as part of how things start, venture capital, this thing called venture capital is part of that. How do you get money for something where a bank would not give you any money because there are no assets? Like, when a startup starts, there are no assets. So typically a bank loan is tied to some kind of an asset. Well, there is no asset in a software when something starts. It's just the people. And then it's very risky because most of these things that start don't end up doing that well. So and long story short, I got into this startup thing, and then I got into how do these startups thing work, and then you said, wow, this venture capital thing. So my journey into venture capital is basically a side effect of me wanting to know how things start. And I was lucky to get a internship in business school to go work at a venture capital firm. Then after we sold our company, I was also lucky to work at another startup firm before I went to Google, and then I came back into the venture world. So I've been in and out of the venture world a few times in Silicon Valley, and I had a good feel for what that environment looked like in terms of what it involved on a day-to-day basis, what skills I needed to have to be successful as a venture capitalist. And earlier in my career, I went back to the operating world. I had a couple of experiences in the venture world, but I kept going back to the operating world because I didn't feel I had enough skills or experiences or knowledge to be a successful investor and help entrepreneurs be successful. So it took me a while to build up all of those skills and the network. And then when the time was right for me personally, I said I want to do this full time, and so that's what I've been doing for the last 9 years now. But it was all accidental. There was no even this role that I ended up in InterWest. The way I got introduced to InterWest is when I was at Google. I actually was looking to acquire a company on behalf of Google that was in the portfolio of InterWest Partners, this firm, and I got to know the board member of that company, who was one of the partners at InterWest. We actually ended up not acquiring that company at Google, but I got to know some of the board members, and a couple of years later, this individual reached out to me and said, "Hey, we have a new fund, and we like what you're doing." By the way, I was already an angel investor while I was at Google. I was doing some things there, and they said, "Look, we like what you're doing, and would you consider doing this full time as an investor, with a little bit bigger capital?" So it was an accidental thing. And, I said, yeah, that's something I would certainly be open to exploring. And one thing led to another. But so I think, yeah, short answer is it was an accidental thing. It wasn't a planned thing. But in some ways, it was part of my thinking about how things work, how things start.
So if someone were to, say, for example, Atit or Jaini or I want to get into the venture capital world in the coming few years, what would your advice be? Should we start our own company? Should we join a startup in an operating role? Or should we send you our resume for an associate position?
Well, I think the good news is that all of the above could work. And I think that the amazing thing about being a venture capitalist, and you can see this, just go look at. I would encourage anybody who's looking in any career, whether it's venture capital or whatever career you want, go look. And now it's easier to look up information. We have the web, and go look up the backgrounds of people who are in those positions right now. And you'll see a variety of backgrounds. I think one of the most fun things about the venture capital industry is that people from all walks of life, with all kinds of backgrounds, have been able to enter this industry and be very successful, right? I mean, you have people who used to be journalists. Mike Moritz, was a journalist at Time Magazine, one of the best VCs of all time. You have people who are lawyers, investment bankers, politicians even, and certainly then entrepreneurs and technologists and biologists, scientists, healthcare professionals. I think the diversity of professions going into the venture industry is quite large. We still don't have enough diversity in terms of women in venture capital, people of color, different ethnicities and genders. So I think that is definitely something that the industry needs to work in, and we need to make sure that we have opened up avenues for people from underrepresented minorities to be part of this ecosystem. But I think in terms of professional backgrounds, if you just think about professional background, it's a pretty diverse ecosystem already. So, the analogy I would give you is think about climbing Mount Everest, right? And you sort of the first time somebody climbed Mount Everest, like Hillary and Tenzing went up there, you're like, oh, that's the path to climb the mountain. Like, here's the path, here's the map, and you sort of start at the base camp and you go up. Well, now, there are thousands of other people who have climbed Mount Everest from all different paths. So the same thing is true of venture capital. There are many, many different ways to enter the profession and be successful. So there is no one path.
All right, let's jump in. Rapid fire with a VC. So the only constraints are that we keep it short, we keep it lighthearted. Should we buy a Bitcoin?
Up to you.
Okay. Which are your top 3 VC firms?
Certainly our firm, Sequoia, Benchmark, and one new one that I am a big fan of, and some of my colleagues from Google work there, is a firm called Felicis Ventures.
All right. Which have been your top 3 investments?
Oh boy, that's like asking me to pick amongst my children. They're all fantastic. We talked about a few of them in this call, but they're all fantastic.
Okay, we'll take that answer. Who are the 3 most Kickass founders that you've worked with?
They're all fantastic.
Okay. Which are the top 3 rocket ship startups? Let's put a caveat that not from the InterWest portfolio.
Oh, I was going to say Canva, the real.
Let's make it harder. If Jaini, Atit, or I were to apply to one startup right now, which one would you tell us to apply to?
Canva.
Okay. So which was a startup or an investment that you learned the most from, and what did you learn?
It's a great question. People say that you learn more from your mistakes than from your successes. I'll give you an example where I lost money as an investor on behalf of our firm. So, it's a company called Joyous, Joyus. And it was a company that was trying to reimagine video commerce. So this idea, if you think about QVC or Home Shopping Network, where you have, you have a TV channel and you are watching the channel and you're buying things because there's a host who's presenting these products to you in a very appealing, engaging fashion, and you are, essentially, it's a little bit of entertainment, it's a little bit of commerce, but it's a very successful paradigm for shopping, right? It's a video-driven shopping experience. And we were trying to reimagine that for the mobile era. So you have people are not glued in front of their television anymore. They're out and about, and they have these mobile devices in their purses, and you can watch and you can buy from that. So we tried we had this company, Joyous. The founder and CEO, very accomplished executive, Sukhinder Singh Cassidy. She was a colleague and a friend of mine from our Google days. She was a president of Asia Pacific at Google. Before that, she was at Amazon. A fantastic CEO who's gone on to do many other things at a very big scale. She was recently the CEO of StubHub, which is part of eBay. So an amazing executive, a large global market. So everything was great, right? Big market, amazing CEO, and the company, the investment failed entirely. And so what was the lesson? The lesson was what we talked about earlier, that when great teams intersect with lousy markets, it's the reputation of the market that survives. The home shopping network and the QVC markets are big and they're based on TV, but that paradigm simply did not translate on mobile devices, where you don't have that much attention span. The connectivity is poor, or at least was poor back in the day. You have to capture somebody's attention in 30 seconds and then convert that viewer into a buyer right there by having the checkout card part of the video player. So there were a lot of issues with infrastructure, technology, user experience that just didn't come together to make it a successful endeavor. You can see now companies like TikTok and even Instagram and maybe some on YouTube are doing a decent job of video commerce. And you can see that maybe the market is there now, but when it wasn't there, maybe 5-10 years ago. So that's an example of investing behind a fantastic founder in a market that seemed really big, but when you got to the bottom of it, it wasn't just the right time for it, and I failed.
All right. So top 3 books that you would recommend.
Boy, so I love mentorship and coaching, and we talked about this earlier. And one of the I think fantastic books that I recommend is a book called $1 Trillion Coach. It's a book about Bill Campbell, the late Bill Campbell, who passed away, and he was this amazing coach and mentor to generations of Silicon Valley companies. And I was lucky to meet him at Google when he was a mentor there, and benefited from that interaction tremendously. But he was this amazing coach, and Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg, my bosses at Google, my mentors at Google, wrote this book about him. And I would highly recommend it because I think it talks about not just Bill, but this concept of mentorship and this notion that no matter how successful you are and how amazing you are, everybody needs a mentor, and everybody can use a coach in their life. And I hope that reading that book is a catalyst for everybody to find a coach like that in their own life. And that could be anybody. It doesn't have to be your manager. It could be somebody in your personal life. It could be professional life. Anybody. It could be a neighbor, somebody who's going to mentor you and give you the best advice and help you get to the next level. So that's a great book. I love. The Bhagavad Gita has always been a fantastic book. I mean, it's like I think about it, especially this notion of just do the work without worrying about the outcome, without worrying about what's in it for you. Just do the work. I think to me it's been really. I go back to that a lot. Do the work. I would say those are the 2 top of mind. There are many others, but I'm sure you guys are smarter than I am. You've read way many more books than I have. So.
Okay. The most interesting Twitter account that you follow, the most humorous or the most interesting?
Elon Musk.
All right. And the top 3 Gujarati things that you like?
Khandvi, Kaju Katri, and Undi.
Nice. Perfect answer. All right. Thank you, Keval, for coming on our show. We really enjoyed. It was great to get this time with you and really understand how the entire startup VC world works.
Thank you for having me, and it's been a fantastic hour to spend with you and your audience. Love your questions, and I appreciate the opportunity. And if there's anything I can do to be helpful, please let me know.
Thanks for listening to the show this week. And if you want to ask us any questions or want to see someone specific on our show, write to us at dollargujarati@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us at Dollar Gujarati. Make sure you don't miss any episode by subscribing to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or however it is that you get your podcast. I'm Dakshaday Shah, and you've been listening to Dollar Gujarati.